Destroy Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now 9:09 p.m. in an extraordinarily depressing city of Budapest. We've forgotten entirely what the sun looks like. We just never get the sun at all anymore. And in any case, evening sets in the middle of the afternoon, and then you have the comforting knowledge that it's even going to get worse as we head towards December, and then of course we've got the grim winter months, and in the meantime. Um, I think I said the other day about how everything. When you go out on your bicycle, you take your life in your hands because the streets are dark, and then you also have all the idiots on the street. So yesterday I took a tumble on my bicycle because some idiot, and the drivers here are complete idiots. Some idiot switched lanes. He switched lanes. He didn't look in the rear view mirror. And as he switched lanes, I had to make an emergency stop. Otherwise, I'd go right into this car. And I took a tumble. I mean, it wasn't serious, but I did hurt myself. So I'm not in the most pleasant frames of mind, because it hurts. Now, of course, what happens when you get into these accidents is the guy gets out of the car. Oh, I'm really very, very sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. Now, what are you supposed to say when somebody keeps saying sorry, sorry, sorry? I mean, you say, okay, go away, just leave me alone. You can't go on being angry with somebody who's keeps apologizing. But the fact is, being sorry just isn't good enough. I mean, you basically could have killed me. But this is what you have to live through. But anyway, on to more cheerful matters. Actually, it's not really that cheerful. I mean, we'll get on to some more cheerful matters when we talk about Matt Gaetz, but I'm not particularly cheerful, to say the least, about the what's been done to Alex Jones. I mean, here's a case of somebody who's just been driven out of business. He has been silenced entirely on the basis of speech. It's entirely in terms of the views that he espouses. The case against him was brought by the parents of the Sandy Hook victims. It was entirely absurd. I mean, he didn't do anything. He didn't shoot anybody. He didn't advocate that anybody shoot children. He didn't defend the killer. He didn't do anything. He took over some notions that others had been espousing, that it was that this wasn't a genuine school shooting. So now he wasn't the first to say this. He then admitted that he was wrong, and he withdrew his claim. Now, so why go after him? Well, obviously because he's an influential figure, and he's the conspiracy theorist, and so they came up with this ridiculous lawsuit when he wasn't in any way at all responsible for what happened to those children. How in any way? I mean, you could obviously the killer was responsible. The killer's parents were partially responsible. The school was partially responsible for the lack of proper security, but Jones wasn't in any way responsible. So they went after him, and then came up with these ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous numbers for damages, like $1.5 billion of damages. Or how the hell do you count that? How on earth can these are bigger damages than are paid for by pharmaceutical companies? How can one individual be responsible for these damages? And how do you calculate these damages? The only damages you can say, well, maybe the parents were a little distressed by reading or hearing about Alex Jones's allegations. All right, let's say you argue that. How the hell does that get to $1.5 billion? That's just simply mental some mental anguish, and that's a $1.5 billion. It's interesting that no one really stepped in the media to defend Jones. You got the sort of Wall Street Journal editorial page has been going, which is always essentially a kind of a defense mechanism for the giant corporations, and they've been for years and years and years. They've been attacking litigators and these litigation lawyers, are always trying to shake down corporations, but they didn't have anything to say about this. They didn't think there was anything wrong with hitting an individual with such a massive fine, which he couldn't possibly pay. However much money he makes on InfoWars, he couldn't possibly come up with $1.5 billion. So nothing in the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which is always we can't have these lawyers, these sharks going after our blessed corporations. They're hitting them. It's totally unjust. So then nothing there. Now, then what they did was that they drove him into bankruptcy, and then even if you drive him into bankruptcy, I mean, obviously he declares bankruptcy. I mean, what else can he do? I mean, he's hit with these massive fine. He doesn't have the resources to pay it, so he goes into bankruptcy. But even then, I mean, if your goal is to ensure that I'm talking about the lawyers. If your goal is to ensure that your clients are paid, get money for the grievous damage that they had suffered, then it would be in your interest to keep Alex Jones going, because Alex Jones' operation is very popular and he makes money. So your interest would be not to shut down Alex Jones and InfoWars. Your interest would be to keep Alex Jones going and then to take a massive cut of his earnings. I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, it's essentially, forcing a man into slavery for the rest of his life, because he essentially makes no money for himself for all his hard work. You basically collect a ridiculous percentage. Slavery, chattel. I mean, it'll be just like a permanent chattel. But instead of that, in making sure that Jones keeps going, they were absolutely determined to drive him out of business, so he would, so that he couldn't go on producing content. So that obviously prevented the plaintiffs from making any money. They're not going to make any money if Alex Jones, is no longer producing InfoWars. Then there's no more money to be had. There's nobody else who can. I mean, this whole show, whatever else you think of Alex Jones, I mean, it revolves around Alex Jones, the personality, his various theories and so on. That's the show. So you can't replace him. Oh, well, we'll put somebody else in instead of Alex Jones. Well, you can't do that because the show goes down, goes down to the toilet. So now InfoWars has been bought by The Onion, and they claim that they're going to relaunch InfoWars as some kind of a satirical site. Now, they're not going to do that. It's not going to happen because, I mean, you can't do it. I mean, InfoWars is Alex Jones. You can't just relaunch something. You can call it InfoWars when you don't have Alex Jones there. So that's not going to happen. That's a lie. The notion that they have any interest in keeping an entity called InfoWars going. That's a lie. Interesting also, who put up the money for the Onion to purchase InfoWars. I find it hard to believe that they could just come up with that kind of money, because it is a valuable franchise. But I don't know, because it's only valuable if it has Alex Jones there. If you have something called InfoWars without Alex Jones, then I don't think it has any value at all. It's nothing. It's worth nothing. So, maybe that was the purpose, that they didn't have to come up with any money. But then it becomes a very interesting question, because, well, what about the other bidders? Because it was an auction bid, and there was at least a bid put in, at least one bid put in by Roger Stone, who is an ally of Alex Jones. Of course, Stone is the former Nixon hand and a former Trump hand, and he's a kind of a likable rascal. Now, I have to assume that if Stone and his conglomerate were to purchase InfoWars, they would bring back Alex Jones. I mean, there'd be no point in having InfoWars run by Roger Stone. I mean, again, anyone other than Alex Jones would render the whole InfoWars operation null and void. So if his bid was much bigger than than the bid by the Onion, and the court refused to take the bid, then that may well be grounds for appeal, because they do have fiduciary duties to take the highest bidder. So they can't just simply take a lower bid, unless the goal is to just simply to shut down InfoWars, which obviously it is. But that may well be grounds for appeal. This is clearly an absolutely outrageous, an obvious legal outrage. This is not how bankruptcy proceedings are supposed to operate. You're supposed to take the highest bidder, because obviously you're trying to make sure that the creditors get as much of their money back as possible. So you can't just simply accept the lowest bid, because then the creditors lose out. And again, you have a fiduciary duty to ensure that everybody gets as much money as possible. But of course, this is not what was going on here. What was going on here was an operation to close down Alex Jones, and that's that does have I mean it's quite a kind of outrageous implications for free speech. It's you're basically shutting down somebody because you don't like the content of his work, and that's all it is. He didn't damage anybody. That's the point. I mean, that's why this whole thing is so fraudulent. If you could say, oh well, he slandered somebody, we defamed somebody, he damaged somebody's reputation, and therefore he must pay money because of the damage that he has inflicted. But that's not the case in this case. He hasn't damaged anybody. The only thing you might be able to say is that the parents of the children suffered some kind of psychological damage, but you still have to then prove something. You'd have to prove, well, what was the psychological damage, and what did that entail? I mean, did you have to go into check into a psychiatric hospital, and did you what were the fees that you had to pay the hospital? What about your medical expenses? You would have to show some damage that you have suffered. You can't just simply say, oh well, my feelings were really hurt, give me some money please. So you got to show real actual damages that you suffered. And of course, they never showed any of that. And so even, even if you come up with some numbers, you're still not going to get anywhere near $1.5 billion. Whatever your medical expenses were, you're not going to come up with $1.5 billion. And then what about anybody else that I mean, other people claim that this was that this wasn't real, and that this was the Obama this was a secret plan of the Obama administration in order to push for confiscation of guns. I mean, that was a theory that was put out. Jones wasn't the first to say it, and he wasn't the last to make that claim. So that was a really rather a grim thing today. And the problem, as as far as I can see, is that even if Jones comes back, I mean, Jones is not the type of person who's just going to fade away. I would imagine he's planning on some kind of a I don't know, new version of InfoWars. He'll call it something else, but he'll want to start some new enterprise. The problem, I think, is that they're going to go after him again. Is that they'll immediately push him into bankruptcy because they'll go on collecting. They say, hey, we haven't collected our $1.5 billion. So if he starts a new enterprise, they're gonna immediately try and grab whatever they can from that, and then he'll have to declare bankruptcy again, and then the whole thing will just start up again. So it's a kind of total outrage, and you can see it's what we were talking about with Hans Manke yesterday, and so there's a lot of legal bad legal news, and an inability to the courts are just simply are really in the business of abusing the power that they have. And there needs to be some kind of reform. I don't know how one reforms the courts, but the courts in America need to be reformed. Sorry. Please, could Summer Petrus. Let me. I just caught my eye. It says, "Please, could you analyze and review and comment upon your own predictions on the outcome of the U.S. election and its aftermath? If I may say it, your prediction was not borne out completely by the facts and events." I think that's really, really unfair. I think my predictions were very good. My predictions were extremely accurate. I predicted here, and people can remember, I predicted here that this election will not be close. I said that Trump would win. I said he would win. I said he would win. I said he wasn't close. And I remember, we did this. And I talked for some length, attacking the various pundits who were doing nothing other than reading the polls and say, "Whoa, this election is close. Whoa, there's just simply a kind of, there isn't anything to separate these two candidates. This is really, really, really close." And I was making fun of this. I said, "This is ridiculous. There's absolutely, there's no evidence that this is going to be close. The fact that the polls say that they put them neck and neck. If we look back on previous elections, in which in 2016, 2020, Trump was behind on the national poll, substantially going in onto election day. Trump was behind in the battleground states substantially, and even so, the result was extremely close. He won a close one against Hillary, and he kind of lost a close one to Biden. But the polls did not indicate. So the polls had both Hillary and Biden very much ahead of Trump. So that's why I said, well, the fact that the polls put them, absolutely neck and neck, and if anything, Trump was ahead. I mean, Trump was ahead nationally in a number of the polls, and he was ahead in a number of the polls in the battleground states. So that's why I said, I don't think this is going to be close. I predicted that Trump would win comfortably. So, I get certain things wrong. I mean, I'll take my hits when I get some things wrong. This one, I think I got right. I'm happy to take criticisms, but this one I think is unwarranted. I was right. This election, it wasn't close. And the people who said it would be close were the ones who just were doing little more than just reading the polls. The polls had he's half a point ahead and she's half a point ahead. That was clearly the wrong approach. Summer Petra says, okay, fair enough, but you did predict massive legal action on the part of the Dems. Well, okay. I mean, I think that was predicated on the election not being called. I mean, I think if there was a lengthy disputes about vote counting, that's what I was thinking, that there would be fighting over which votes to count and so on. That would drag on for some time. But as it turned out, everything was decided on election night. I mean, it was all over within a few weeks. I mean, not weeks, but within a few hours. So once that's decided, I mean, there isn't really much you can do with legal action, and there has been some legal action. You can see in Pennsylvania they've tried some legal action, but yeah, I mean, it's DJ says, George, when you are right, you are right, and you are right. Yeah, thank you, DJ. I really appreciate that. Exactly. I mean, again, I mean, I'm not saying I'm always right. I mean, I get sometimes but I'm not a seer, but this one I called it right. So. But it is true that I thought that there would be more resistance initially, that there would be a ferocious resistance on the streets. There'd be riots and so on, and there'd be such rage over Trump's win, and that didn't happen. That's one would have to then analyze why that didn't happen. I think because of the margins were such that you can't really protest particularly vigorously when a candidate has won quite so substantially. I mean, one of the things that triggered the riots in 2016 was that he didn't win the popular vote. Not winning the popular vote kind of undermined his election win. I mean, it doesn't really, because that's not how you count. The Americans don't decide elections by the popular vote; it's done by the Electoral College. But nonetheless, the fact that he lost the popular vote that fueled the riots in 2016. So yeah, I mean, that didn't really happen. But what may happen, again, the election is over, so we're now in the post-election aftermath, and there's clearly going to be mobilization on a number of issues. Clearly, there's going to be mobilization on the immigration issue. I mean, Trump is taking a very tough stance on immigration. I mean, I think he does intend to go ahead with the mass deportation. This wasn't just an election promise. He intends to go ahead with it. Don't know. We'll see whether it succeeds, because obviously the courts are going to step in, and he's going to have to deal with the courts, and that could drag on for a while, because you have to go through the district courts, and then the appellate courts, and then and then eventually he's going to end up probably in the Supreme Court. So that could drag on for a bit. But I think he will win. I think the legal case for mass deportations, I think, is pretty rock solid. I mean, you may argue, you can certainly argue that it's not humane and it involves cruelty, but the legal case is unanswerable. I mean, if you're in the country legally, you're eligible for deportation. You get your day in court, but basically, once the court says you have to go, then you have to go. I mean, you can't just simply stay on and ignore the court's decision. And obviously, there are a number of people, quite a number of people in the United States currently who have already exhausted all their legal options and have already been ordered deported, but they haven't been deported, so they're obviously gone. But I think they're going to be the criminals again. They say, hey, you're a criminal. You have no business being in the country. So I think they're going to be gone. But then that probably doesn't add up to mass deportations. But in order to get to the mass deportations, I think they're going to have to, really apply themselves, and that I think could spark riots. Here we get into what I wanted to talk about a little bit in the before we get on to the questions from our subscribers. But the whole Matt Gaetz thing. I mean, when we were here on Tuesday, everything was very grim because remember we were talking about Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. We're talking about Matt Waltz, National Security Advisor. We were talking about Mike Huckabee. I think he had already been named then, Mike Huckabee, as U.S. Ambassador to Israel. They basically, I mean, there was some people here who thought that, well, it may not be as bad as I think, they've said many things. Rubio said this then, but Rubio said different things recently, and the same thing goes. Waltz said this, but now recently he said that. Okay, I mean, we don't have to go through that argument again because ultimately we'll see what happens. Politicians are politicians. They say many things on many occasions, and you just pays your money and you takes your choice as to which of their statements are to be taken seriously. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just reading a bit. Cynthia says it's still rather fishy how many Sandy Hook families mysteriously had their home mortgages paid off. Don't you think? I think it's very mysterious. I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of very strange aspects to that to that case. But but my concern is just how this was exploited to destroy a man. I mean, to destroy a man who has a voice, who has a following, and for no reason. I mean, he had nothing whatever to do with the events at the Sandy Hook. But you're absolutely right about the family, Cynthia. But anyway, so we were talking about that on Tuesday, and things look pretty bleak because it was to me, it was a very conventional foreign policy pick, and then again we had Elise Stefanik as the ambassador to the U.S. ambassador to the UN, and then we had the naming of Hegseth, Pete Hegseth, the defense, and who clearly, to say the least, is not my cup of tea. But he's gone. Everyone went absolutely crazy. I always like it when everyone goes absolutely crazy over a nomination. Much as I sort of have very little time for Pete Hegseth, but but the fact that he riles some people up, then I have a kind of then I kind of at least that makes me happy. But of course, then we had Matt Gaetz yesterday, and of course Tulsi Gabbard. nation. And then, of course, I went absolutely crazy. So the Tulsi thing is, of course, particularly rich because the out come all the nonsense about Russia. Oh, she's echoing Putin's talking points. All this absolute nonsense we've had for years. She visited Assad. All this rubbish. Um, and but what I think is always very amusing is whenever the issue of qualifications, she doesn't have the qualifications for that position. As if somehow the people who get these jobs all eminently really qualified to hold these sorts of positions. Well, I mean, what was Hillary Clinton's qualification to be Secretary of State? I mean, she'd been senator, right? She'd been senator for 8 years up until then. And she had no particular foreign policy experience. Had never really taken much interest in foreign policy. What exactly were her qualifications to be Secretary of State? Well, that didn't make anyone. So, yeah, but Tulsi has, she's served in the military, and she's taken a lot of interest in intelligence matters. This is something that she's very, very interested in. And that really helps. I mean, this is something that somebody has a real interest in. So she has that. Now, of course, Matt Gaetz is again, they say, well, what are his qualifications? Of course, he doesn't have qualifications, but that really isn't the issue. You don't have to have the qualification. You don't have to be a former U.S. attorney or a former attorney general to be attorney general. The case was that, and in the case of both Gaetz and Tulsi, that Trump wants to dismantle the intelligence agencies, and Trump wants to dismantle the Justice Department. Now, the rumor is that Kash Patel will be appointed director of the FBI. Again, that hasn't been confirmed, but that's the rumor. So if you got Tulsi, Kash Patel, and then Matt Gaetz, what you're basically doing is you're going to do what needed to be done and what has needed to be done for many years, which is to dismantle the whole national security state, and in particular to prevent this national security state to target political opponents. I mean, they've been doing this now for years. I mean, they did the most extreme way that they did it was against Trump, but they also did it against Tulsi. They also did it against Bernie Sanders, and so that's that is very important, and clearly the fact that the intelligence agencies have been giving wrong information to the president. I mean, remember when we talked before about the I mean, look, we can go back to the bad intelligence that was fed to Bush and Cheney, though it wasn't I mean, the intelligence that was fed to them was the intelligence that they wanted. They wanted intelligence to tell them that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. But what was done to Trump, that's really quite sinister, because that was really essentially politicizing the intelligence agencies, so that they conducted a political war against domestic politicians, and you can't do that. You can't simply use the powers of the security services and the intelligence agencies to destroy domestic political opponents. I mean, that's what. So it was a very serious what they did, and as we if you watch the conversation with Hans Manke, there has been no real reckoning with what happened. I mean, this was the FBI and the CIA intervened in domestic American politics to destroy Donald Trump. And then they continued with this operation after he was elected president, with suggesting, which is what James Comey, the FBI director, repeatedly suggested, when something that he knew was false, that there may be some truth to this Steele dossier. He knew it was crap, and yet, but nonetheless, in his public pronouncements, he was giving the impression to Trump's political opponents in the Congress that there may well be some truth there. And then we had Trump was misled, repeatedly misled, for instance, about what the Russians were doing. Was misled about how somehow the ducks, remember with the ducks, that somehow with Skripal, that in the UK, the Skripal was poisoned, and this poison, this Novichok, killed ducks. And that story about that they killed ducks persuaded Trump to order the expulsion of Russian diplomats from the US. He was reluctant at first to do so. And then Gina Haspel, who was the CIA director, she then came up with this story of the ducks. So this is very serious stuff. And clearly Tulsi will look into that. And then you got the case of Matt Gaetz. Now, Matt Gaetz has been clearly himself a victim of the Justice Department. And what you really need there, you don't need somebody who's a former U.S. attorney. Why do you need that? You already have U.S. attorneys working there. I mean, there's no shortage of U.S. attorneys who are working at the Justice Department. What you need is somebody who's going to get his hands around justice and get to the bottom of the sort of the weaponization of the Justice Department. Particularly the weaponization against Trump. I mean, that you have to get to the bottom of that. And again, it's possible again that no criminal proceedings can be initiated because it's now too late. And anyway, these people like Jack Smith, they're very clever. They can weasel their way out of any criminal liability. And even if you don't do that, it'd be good to have somebody who's going to get to the bottom of what really has been going on at DOJ, at the intelligence agencies for the past, 20 years, probably since 9/11. I think it all went into high gear at the time of 9/11. So that's why I think Matt Gaetz is a very good appointment, because that's his job. His job is really to dismantle DOJ, and that that's the job now. So the fact that he doesn't have expertise, expertise. Remember what was the name of that? Janet Reno, one of the worst attorney generals ever. But Janet Reno, I think she was an attorney general in Florida. I don't know where she was. Was she the actual attorney general? But anyway, she had she was a big kind of figure in Florida, and she got to be attorney general. Why? I mean, what was the reason for that, other than that I think Hillary Clinton liked her? But again, you don't need people who know how to prosecute. They're already there. They're already at the DOJ. They have the experience of prosecution. You need somebody who is going to dismantle all the sort of the politicization of the DOJ, and I think that's why it's a good pick. Now, I don't know. There was a question: well, will he get to confirmed by the Senate? I don't know whether he will. I mean, there's all the hysteria being whipped up by the the Republican senators. Obviously, every single Democrat is going to vote against him. That's a given. and that's already, I think, whatever it's going to be, 47. That's 47 votes against. So you're only thinking in terms of losing 4 votes. I mean, if 4 Republicans go over to the Democrats, then that's it. His nomination is sunk. We already know that Lisa Murkowski will vote against him, so they already have that 1 vote. They need another 3, and I guess we don't. Susan Collins hasn't yet said. She's already expressed her concerns, but she hasn't yet said that she will vote against. But I mean, I probably would say that he won't make it. Because I think that there's going to be all sorts of things that are going to be. Everyone's just going to go absolutely crazy digging up stuff on Matt Gaetz. I think he hasn't been the most, upright of citizens. I don't really mind, but they're going to dig up all sorts of things about him. And I think whatever they dig up, probably nothing that's criminal, but as long as it's sort of scandalous and disreputable, they're going to use it against him. And so I think that I think there'll be enough. That they're going to dig up enough dirt on him to persuade just the 3 Republican senators to say we're not going to vote for him. But that's okay. I mean, Trump would be quite happy. Having this fight over Matt Gaetz. Trump is probably quite happy. He's just going to be because he's just going to he'll be on the media every night with Hannity or whoever. Declaring that we really need to dismantle DOJ. We really need to get to the bottom of what's been going on with all these creatures, all the Comeys and Strzoks and everybody else, and Bruce Orr and the whole of that Russiagate gang. We need to get to the bottom of that. We need to get to the bottom of Merrick Garland. We need to get to the bottom of Jack Smith. So. I think that's going to be quite good for Trump, even if Matt Gaetz doesn't make it. And of course, if Gaetz doesn't make it, he can just name somebody else, and then see whether the Democrats and the Republicans are going to sabotage the next person. So if Gaetz doesn't make it, he can always name. Paxton, Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General, and then the Republicans will be reluctant, to sabotage a second Attorney General pick. So even if Gaetz goes down, I think Trump will get somebody good into the Justice Department. So that was quite nice. I don't think they're going to have anything on Tulsi. I just think that. This stuff about she said nice things about Putin. I don't think that's going to be enough to derail her candidacy. I think she'll get through, and I think she'll be good. I think that'll be very good. Anyway, let's take a look at our subscribers on locals. These are the people who slog hard and to try to make this. Try to keep the dogs happy, and then that's the main thing. So, thank you very much. And Danoki puts the first question. Says Kedvesh George, I'm eagerly awaiting for Trump's next swampish neocon psycho-Zionist appointment that will be once again explained as a secret 5D patriot move to expose them evil globalists for the umpteenth time. You have to wonder when all this exposing is going to actually bear some fruit. We really are in a perpetual comedy hour with these MAGA cultists. Yeah, I think that the Israel part of it is so intensely pro-Israeli that it is quite uh, shocking. I don't see how Trump can put this team in place, and pursue in any way the kind of more even-handed policy that we had hoped he would pursue. Because and we talked about this, that somehow. Well, now that he's not running for re-election, he doesn't need the Adelson money. The legal issues, that he's put those behind him. And so, he doesn't need money for his legal funds and everything else. So now he can take an even-handed approach to Israel. But that hasn't in any way materialized. It's clear that that's not where Trump wants to go. I mean, if you hire somebody like Mike Huckabee, who as your ambassador to Israel, and given the wild things that he says, I mean, he says there's no such thing as a Palestinian, there's no such thing as the West Bank, that's just Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as an occupation; they're just communities. That is so extreme that there's nothing you can do about that. This is the person you go with. These are the people who are going to implement and explain your policy. And so, when we're reading today that these these creatures around Netanyahu are now salivating and are seeing this as the opportunity to annex the West Bank. Whatever chunk of the West Bank that they intend to annex, you'd have to say that there's a good chance of that. I'd say that was there's a real opportunity for that. The one area that I'm not sure about this is the one with Iran. That we know that Netanyahu and the people around Netanyahu, have for long wanted to embroil the United States in a war against Iran, and they're obviously going to try to do that. But there, I'm not sure that they will succeed, because I think Trump himself is averse to getting involved in a war, but he may not have much choice in the matter. He may be manipulated into doing so. Just like during his first term, after having spoken quite positively about Bashar al-Assad during the campaign, he then went ahead and bombed Syria twice, buying into all the nonsense about the chemical weapons attacks. So, Trump may, want to stay out of a war with Iran, but you can see in all sorts of ways in which he might be manipulated into it. But I do think that the people around Trump on this issue believe that this is the opportunity, of a lifetime, of the century, to create the greater state of Israel, which is to seize the mandatory Palestine, which Israel has always coveted, and say this is Israel. Obviously, that the people who like Waltz, Rubio, they wouldn't have any problems with it. The only thing that's standing in the way of an annexation, of a formal annexation of the West Bank and Gaza, would be what do you do with the Palestinians? Egypt obviously has said, no, you are not going to move the Palestinians into Sinai. Jordan has also said, no, you're not moving any Palestinians into Jordan. So that's going to be a definite bone of contention as to where you're going to do. I mean, Trump could try to bribe Sisi to take the Palestinians, but I don't think Sisi could be bribed, because that's just going to create headaches for decades for Egypt and for Jordan. It'll take decades. What are they going to do with those millions of Palestinians? I mean, it's just going to create turmoil in their countries. So that is a real problem. I mean, Israel obviously is quite happy to drive them into the Sinai, but and they've been looking to do that really since October the 7th. But Egypt has said no, and I don't see Trump, persuading Sisi to change his mind. Whatever incentives he's going to offer Sisi, I just don't see him changing his mind. The same with Jordan. So that would be a drawback. I mean, of course, what they could try to do is not take the whole of the West Bank, just take a big chunk of the West Bank, so then push the Palestinians into, as they do with Gaza, just push them into in another part of the West Bank, and something like that, I guess, could be done, and then you have to think, given the mindset of these people. The mindset is Israel can do no wrong. American interests and Israeli interests are identical. The source of all the problems in the Middle East, the only reason there are any problems at all in the Middle East, is Iran. Iran is the destabilizing factor. How is it destabilizing? Well, it's encouraging Palestinian resistance. So that if you go in with that mindset, then sooner or later, you are going to be pushed into annexation of the West Bank, and sooner or later you're going to be pushed into some kind of an armed conflict with Iran. And again, yeah, it's true, Trump is instinctively averse to war. However, during his first term, he wasn't exactly that averse to it. He didn't start any new wars. On the other hand, he didn't end them either. And when we look at Afghanistan, yeah, he talked a good game about how he was going to withdraw from Afghanistan, and he negotiated with the Taliban leaders, the Doha Accords, but he didn't follow through. And this is where it gets quite interesting. According to his recent pronouncements, all the things he has said recently was that he, unlike Biden, would have kept Bagram Air Base. He says it repeatedly. He would never have given up Bagram Air Base. Now, we don't know whether that's the case, because there was nothing about Bagram Air Base in the Doha Accords. The Doha Accords simply spelled out that all American forces would be withdrawn from Afghanistan. He didn't say anything about Bagram Air Base. But the fact that he brings it up now, but somehow, no, I was never going to withdraw completely from Afghanistan. I was going to keep Bagram Air Base. That shows his mentality. He's not thinking in terms of withdrawing from anywhere. I mean, he didn't withdraw from Syria. I mean, in the case of Iraq, he never even promised to withdraw from Iraq, but he didn't withdraw from Syria. He talked about it. And so, I don't believe he's going to withdraw from Syria now, because, look, I mean, the Americans are now bombing Syria on an almost daily basis, as is Israel. So both America and Israel are bombing Syria. Why? Because Syria is a conduit for Iran. Again, this is the Biden administration. I think this is where Trump is going to go. Um, it's hard to see what voices would be around Trump who would urge a different course of action. And that's what you really need. I mean, whenever people say, oh, Trump thinks this or Trump thinks that, you'll say, okay, well, who in the Trump orbit would urge him to think in terms of a just solution to the Palestinian problem? I don't see it. I mean, we heard about Doug McGregor, but he doesn't seem to be in the Trump orbit. And then just before we came on, I read in Politico, for take that for whatever it's worth, as to who is being considered for deputy national security advisors. Deputy national security advisor, number 2 to Mike Waltz, none other than Sebastian Gorka. Now, this hasn't been confirmed, and I don't know if it's true. Just because it's in Politico doesn't mean it's true. But I can't think of anything more horrific, anything more disgusting, anything more nauseating than having Sebastian Gorka in the White House as Trump's number 2 national security advisor. So, I guess when Mike Waltz is out sick or out on vacation or whatever it is, it'll be Sebastian Gorka who will be presenting briefings to Trump. I mean, we don't have to go into all the horrific details of Sebastian Gorka's past positions and current positions, but this is a neocon, this is a Russophobe, this is a war hawk. Obviously, as you would expect, a fanatically pro-Israel, but he's a fanatical Russophobe. I mean, the Sebastian Gorka was always going to be the test of whether Trump is now embarking on a different course, or is this going to be the same as in the first term? At least during the first term, Sebastian Gorka was shown the door very early on. If you recall, Bannon was, that's what I mean. I mean, in the early days of Trump, he seemed to want to take a different course. I mean, we talked about it the other day. I mean, he had Michael Flynn, your national security advisor. You had Rex Tillerson with his background in the energy industry. And of course, you had Steve Bannon, with his kind of populist nationalism. And of course, with Steve Bannon came, the Bannonites, including Sebastian Gorka. But the moment Bannon was kind of pushed out the door by Jared Kushner, Gorka went with him. I mean, Gorka had no independent standing. He was only there on because he was holding Bannon's coattails. He was just there on his coattails. So the moment Bannon was out went Gorka. But now Gorka is going to be in. It looks like, again, it hasn't been confirmed, but it could be Gorka is going to be in, and Bannon isn't going to be in, but it'll be just Gorka. And Gorka has wormed his way into Trump's good graces. He goes to Mar-a-Lago a great deal. These are not good people. So, but we'll see. Anyway, Donaki says, sadly for the cultists, though I have to give credit to Michael Tracy's conclusion, Trump makes appointments based on Fox News appearances and sycophanting loyalty post-2020. That said, sorry, 5-day Patriot moves will have to wait again. Well, that may well be. I mean, I remember when he did the same thing again in his first term when the deputy national, it was Michael Flynn was the national security advisor, and then the deputy national security advisor was this horrible, absolutely idiotic creature K.T. McFarlane, total moron, real absolute idiot. But she got this number 2 slot. She somehow had persuaded some people that she knew something about foreign policy. I mean, I think she had money. She hung out on the Upper East Side, so she got to be friends with Henry Kissinger. But the reason she got that gig as the number 2 to Flynn was that she used to appear on Fox News a lot. She was always on Fox News, kind of as a seasoned foreign policy professional. She wasn't in any way seasoned, but I think she'd had spent some time on Henry Kissinger's National Security Council, or maybe I think it was Henry Kissinger, maybe also under Reagan. She'd worked there. Yeah, but how you get is some people that get you there. But in any case, the reason she got that job was that Don Jr. had seen her on Fox News. He'd seen her, and she was a ubiquitous person. She'd be on Hannity. I think she'd and even on the Fox shows daily. And then she was even on that late night Fox News comedy show, which was run by Greg Gutfeld. I can't remember what it was called. It was I don't know what it was, late night. I don't know. She used to appear on that, and I don't know. Don Jr. liked her. And so he was the one who pushed for her to be named number 2 to Michael Flynn. Unfortunately for her, that of course was once Flynn was gone. She was next on the chopping block, so she didn't survive for very long after Flynn. However, she survived long enough to hire some of the worst people imaginable for the National Security Council. She hired Fiona Hill. That was one of her great acts, to hire Fiona Hill. But anyway, my point is that somehow he does go for these the Fox News thing. The problem, and I think this is a general weakness of Trump, is I think he gets most of his information from television. I don't think he reads books, to be honest. I mean, that was in some ways that's a strength. I mean, he knows television, he knows the world of entertainment, and that's, someone like, let's say, Pat Buchanan. And Buchanan was really, he was the one who blazed the trail for Trump. It was Buchanan who kind of created this populist, nationalist, anti-interventionist agenda. He did that when he ran in 1992, and Trump basically just took this over. But Buchanan was different. Buchanan was an intellectual. Buchanan was very well read. However, as a public persona, he wasn't really that appealing. He just wasn't really good. If you actually watch some of his speeches, he tended to laugh at his own jokes, and it just doesn't. They never came across well. He was a good speaker, and he was obviously a very smart guy, and an intellectual. But he didn't have much of a public appeal. Trump, on the other hand, who doesn't read books, he does know how to appeal to people. He knows how to appeal to crowds. But that's the problem. So when you say, well, he goes for Fox News for his sources, yeah, because that's where he gets his information from, on Fox News. That's how he came up with why he hired John Bolton. He saw John Bolton on Fox News, and so he was impressed by him. I'm not sure why, but he was impressed by Bolton. Of course, they didn't see eye to eye quite quickly, but he was impressed by Bolton. In the case of Hexeth, Trump is often persuaded, again, because he's so into television, he is persuaded by people who look good. He's always had that weakness that he hires people who look good, whether it's men or women. He's very preoccupied with how people look. And you can even see it when he's addressing crowds, how he's always commenting on people's looks. Men's looks and women's looks. He's always commenting on that. He's always impressed by a handsome man. He's always impressed by a man who's very athletic looking. And and I think that I think contributed to why he went for Hexet. He is good looking, and he's articulate, and he's kind of athletic looking, and he has a Scandinavian background. I think it's all Norwegian background, and Trump has a weakness for Norwegians. Remember, even when he had that conversation about shithole countries, he said, "Hey, why can't we get more Norwegians here?" So, well, with Hexet, he has the Norwegians. And oh yeah, that's a yes. And Marty, thank you, Marty, for putting the Amazon link to my forthcoming book, which so start saving. So thank you so much, Marty. It's really generous of you. Anyway, Judy, always very good to see you. Thank you, Judy. Thank you for your generosity. Always appreciate it. So Judy says, today's RT has an article by Fyodor Lukyanov, head of the Presidium of the Council on Foreign and Defense Policy and Research at the Valdai Club. He says, we hear the U.S. president-elect promised to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. It sounds unrealistic to say the least, but it reflects his desire, which is obviously a conscious one, which means it shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. Okay, and then Judy goes on. Lukyanov's article is titled, "This is why Trump's approach to Ukraine is so different." It ends, everyone will be talking about how a window of opportunity has opened for a short time, and we must not miss this chance. Either this window is a gateway to new stable relations, and it cannot be forced open, but it will need a careful approach, or it's a portal to an even more brutal struggle because it births yet another disappointment. Well, I think that's probably reasonable. I mean, I think that as I outlined what I think is going to happen next, and and I have to say, the caveat, I'm speculating like everyone else, but given the noises that have come out of the Trump camp, and given that Trump has promised that he's going to, end this war. I mean, that is definitely an unambiguous promise that he's repeated again and again and again. He's going to end this war. Then he's going to come up with a peace plan, and I think the peace plan will probably be very similar to the plans that have appeared both in the comments of J.D. Vance and the stories in the Wall Street Journal, in Bloomberg, which is a ceasefire along the current line of contact, and maybe a demilitarized zone, and no NATO membership for Ukraine for 20 years or whatever. The problem with that plan is that it doesn't really address. I mean, if you look at it from Ukraine's point of view, Ukraine basically it loses territory. Now you can argue that, well, what does it matter what Ukraine says? Ukraine's a complete dependency of the United States, so Ukraine would just have to accept whatever America says. But in the case of Russia, it doesn't really address Russia's problems because, in the first place, as things stand, Russia really doesn't control any of the 4 oblasts that it claims as now as part of the Russian Federation. It more or less controls about 98% of Lugansk, but not all of it. There's still 2% that's under Ukraine occupation. When it comes to the Donetsk Oblast, Russia occupies 60%, maybe 2/3, something like that. Maybe, it's about 60% now, maybe it'll be 2/3 by the time we get to next spring. But it's still 2/3. When it comes to Kherson, Russia only occupies 40% of Kherson. Zaporozhye, I think, is a little bit more. I think Russia occupies about 70%, but not. But again, it doesn't occupy Zaporozhye city. So again, it doesn't really occupy any of the fully occupy any of the oblasts that Russia claims as part of the Russian Federation. So if you have a ceasefire, then you basically are admitting that you're not in full occupation of your own territory. The other thing is that, of course, the NATO membership thing is kind of a red herring now, because clearly part of the Trump plan would be that the United States would go on arming Ukraine. I mean, they're just going to keep on arming it. They're not just going to stop delivering arms. They're just going to keep pouring more and more arms to it, which means, again, Ukraine will effectively be a de facto member of NATO. But more seriously, Ukraine could start this thing up again. NATO, Ukraine could start this up again in 10 years. And it would be done through subversion or terrorist acts and so on. Because NATO will continue its propaganda. I mean, it will continue this relentless propaganda against Russia. Russia's occupying territory. I mean, just like it did during the Minsk years. Which, after all, Stoltenberg boasts about how during the Minsk years, NATO continued to arm Ukraine and was continually demanding Russian withdrawal from Ukraine. So that's what they'll say. Hey, these are all illegal, illegitimate occupations of Ukraine by Russia. So that the propaganda campaign will continue against Russia. NATO will continue to arm Ukraine. So it'll be hard to see how Russia gains from such a deal. But that's not. It's possible. And again, it is possible, but Russia will take it. We'll just say we'll bring this thing to an end. And Russia could argue, not exactly plausibly, but Russia could argue that, hey, we've accomplished some of our goals. We've got some additional territory, which we don't have all the territory, but we've got some additional territory. Ukraine isn't in NATO. We've prevented Ukraine from joining NATO. And so it hasn't been that bad. And look at Ukraine. Ukraine has failed. Ukraine has lost territory. So we've done better than Ukraine has. So it's possible. I mean, I think if it's not impossible that if Trump puts forward this plan, Russia will say, they can quibble about this, that, and the other. Maybe they'll make some demands on Ukraine, like you've got to make some constitutional change. Maybe put in as part of your constitution, we're not going to have any Nazis in any official positions in Ukraine. They're kind of fairly meaningless gesture, and that maybe that could bring it to an end. I mean, I'm not hopeful because I don't think Russia will be very satisfied with it, and I think Russians, once it's over, there's going to have to be a reckoning within Russia as to whether the sacrifices they made have been worth it. Again, Putin would probably ask for some kind of sanctions relief. I don't think that he's going to get it. I don't think Trump will offer any sanctions relief because I don't even know how easy you can do that, because a lot of the sanctions are now mandated by Congress. So I don't know whether sanctions relief is really doable. Congress will never lift sanctions. So maybe it could work. I mean, again, as I say, it doesn't matter what Ukraine thinks, because Ukraine is so beholden to the United States that if Trump says this is the plan, then Ukraine will have to go along with it. The question then is, would Russia accept it? It's possible. I tend to doubt it. But Russia may just think in terms of, look, we've got Trump here. We can work something out with Trump. If we get this out of the way, we can go on to think about other things. We can just work with Trump on other issues. Um, and besides, you know, they may not want to antagonize Trump. There is a kind of erratic and mercurial aspect of his personality that would concern the Russians. In the case of Biden, they know what Biden is about. They know Biden doesn't want to risk what risks Biden is or is not willing to take. With Trump, they ultimately don't know, and so they might think that why don't we just settle and take this deal, even though it hasn't really amounted to much. Anyway, long-winded way of saying that it's quite possible whether Lukyanov is right and that some deal like this could be achieved, even though I think Russia will not have achieved anything remotely what they would hope to achieve when they started the whole so-called SMO. But they may think that, hey, this is the best that we can get, and that it might be foolish to continue and maybe antagonize Trump, and you never know how Trump is going to react. So yeah, so yeah, I think it's Lukyanov's argument is reasonable. No, I'm not saying that that's the way it's going to work out, but it is possible. Anyway, thank you very much, Judy. Really appreciate your generosity. And then Robert, thank you, Robert. Thank you for your generosity. Really appreciate that. So Robert says there was a story in RT today about the FBI's raid on the New York City home of Polymarket founder Shane Copeland. Yeah, that story appeared elsewhere. Yeah, he's the Polymarket. That's the betting app. Where Polymarket made very accurate predictions on the 2024 election, including the prediction that a red wave would demolish the blue wall. Yep. Legacy polling and mainstream media proved useless. You have to wonder who put Biden up to going after Polymarket. The political establishment, legacy media, the polling industry, the lot of them. It is very, very interesting because as far as I can make out, Americans are not able to bet on Polymarket. I mean, it's an international app, but it's Americans don't bet on Polymarket. So it's a very, very kind of sinister development, because from what I read, they raided his home and they seized all his apps, his phone and everything else, and they never really spelled out what it was that they were investigating. What crime is he suspected of having committed? It's just quite outrageous. And I read, I can't remember where I read today, a story, some Republican who was asked about, hey, why did Trump nominate Matt Gaetz? And this Republican, unnamed Republican, said, well, because he's sick of shit like this. And he pointed to this to this attack. Because yeah, that's exactly it. It's shit like that. You target somebody, and what crime is he supposed to have committed? And you just you raid his home. There's usually early in the morning you seize his apps, and you don't even tell him what crime is he supposed to have committed. But I obviously it's what he did, the influence that he had in the run up to the election, when people could see for Polymarket where the betting money was going, where it was obvious that the sensible money was not going with the pundits. Oh, this is a very, very close race. This is it's on a knife edge. There's just the thin piece of tissue paper separating Trump and Harris, and the Polymarket's making clear no, absolutely. And they were quite convinced. The serious money is convinced that Trump is going to win this one comfortably. So yeah, so I think that's a very, very very creepy development. It's just this is the Biden Merrick Garland Justice Department. Um, uh, so, and then Dan Rock's talking about this, replying to Danuki about the Fox News and so on. Um, let's see what happens domestically. Foreign affairs, much the same. Forever wars do as we say. So I think so. I think that that's really the case. I kind of like the the domestic agenda. I think is fine. I think America really does have to address this immigration problem. This is clearly a policy being driven at the highest levels of government to shepherd people into the country, to drive down wages. It's the way you can fool people that there's no inflation in the economy, because you can keep driving down wages through immigration, and therefore there's no inflation. Although clearly governments, particularly the U.S. government, are pursuing an inflationary policy, they're printing money, but you can prevent the consequences of that inflation by continually driving down wages. I think Jay Powell, admitted it once. That's how we address the inflation problem. We just keep driving down wages. That's hence the usefulness of ongoing mass immigration. So I think that is really absolutely essential. Bring mass immigration to an end, and then Americans start, working class Americans start to feel better off because the wages are going to start rising. So that's important. I think dismantling the national security state, which with Tulsi and Gates and Kash Patel, I think that's important. Again, I'm sympathetic to tariffs. I think tariffs make a lot of sense. I think it makes absolute sense to protect your strategic industries. What all the key industries. You don't have to protect everything, but you do have to protect your most important industries, rather than just allow them to be wiped out by cheap labor abroad. So I think that makes sense. So the domestic agenda is fine. The problem is that with foreign affairs, it's the same old, same people. They run it, same ideas, same complete nonsense. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they have the same idiotic ideas about the world. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. There's a little bit tinkering around the edges. Trump talks about we're going to take that oil, whatever. Whereas they talk about human rights and rules-based order, but the result is exactly the same. And here you got the Republicans. They say, "Oh, no more nation building. No, we're not doing nation building." But it's the same basic idea. We got to, even if we don't have nation building, let's bomb them. We'll just do it from the air. No boots on the ground, but we'll do it from the air. So, when it comes to foreign policy, there's no difference at all, between them, and they continue with the same agenda. And I think that's, I think Trump has, a distinctive domestic agenda. But I'm not buying that he is in any way very different on foreign policy. I might be wrong. We might be surprised, but and particularly as the Republicans are really, really dumb when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, the Democrats are dumb as well, but Republicans, they come on and they talk very sensibly here. Talk about the DOJ and so on. You think, oh, this is good. But other than a few isolated people like Rand Paul or Thomas Massey, most of the time it's the same, good guys, bad guys, we got to, Iran is the sort of the problem. We got to deal with Putin's KGB and whatever. So no real hope there. DJ, thank you so much. You're very kind. Woof woof. Yeah, the dogs are in a very, very foul mood. I mean, as I say, it's getting very cold now, and when they look at the tip jar, think, well, that's hey, the temperature is sinking like a rock. But not only is the temperature sinking like a rock, the tip jar is sinking like a rock. It's not rising the way it's like the temperature is supposed to rise, so the tip jar is supposed to rise. So they're not in a good mood. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Very good to see you, Cynthia, and thank you so much for your generosity. And so Cynthia says, as I see it, our war against Russia will likely remain a proxy war. Thus, it's unlikely to face fierce opposition from the American public. But the same can't be said about Israel's war. As of now, it's also just a US proxy war. But if Israel expands that war to include Iran, the US will have to deploy its own troops in the region in order to help do most of the fighting for Israel, causing that war to face fierce opposition from the American public. I agree with you. I think that the way the war in Russia is being going, you're absolutely right. It's a proxy war, and I don't think I don't think Trump will want to change any of that. So, as I said earlier, I mean, he'll make this offer if Russia accepts, then it's over. If Russia doesn't accept, I think it just continues along the same lines, and there's no reason for America to change its policy. It's a proxy war, which means somebody else is getting killed, and that's the point. It's Ukrainians and Russians are getting killed. Americans are not getting killed, and it's helping the American military-industrial complex. It's helping American manufacturing. So Americans aren't doing badly out of it. So there's no real incentive on America's part to bring it to an end, other than Trump made this promise, and I think Trump has some obligation to make good on his promise. But other than that, so what? America doesn't suffer as a result of this war. But you're right. In the case of Israel, it is a more difficult one, because the people around Trump, they are absolutely obsessed with Iran. You ask any of them, and they say the source of all the problems in the Middle East is Iran. That's say there wouldn't be any problem with the Palestinians if it weren't for Iran. So that could suggest that America's going to get into a direct shooting war. Now, how does that happen? If Israel launches another attack on Iran, and then Iran retaliates and inflicts serious damage on Israel, then I think America does get sucked into the war. But where I'm not sure about is when you say U.S. will have to deploy its own troops. I don't really know how it would deploy troops. I mean, what would be the point of deploying troops? I mean, what are you going to do? Are they going to seize some piece of territory of Iran? That wouldn't be a very good move. I mean, it's they would be very vulnerable if they try to invade Iran and seize any kind of a strategic location. They would be, almost certainly be vulnerable to attack from Iran. So I would think that if the United States does get directly involved in on Israel's side, that it'll be at the level of missile attacks. So it'll be missile attacks, drone attacks, trying to take out strategic targets inside Iran. I don't see America sending in troops, because I don't quite see where you would deploy American troops in Iran. I mean, they did that with Iraq, but the goal with Iraq was to overthrow Saddam Hussein. But Iran is much stronger than Iraq. I mean, remember Iraq. By the time the Americans invaded in 2003, Iraq was very weak. I mean, it'd been 12 years of sanctions. So it really was a kind of a fairly easy to defeat the Iraqi army. But even so, it was a major military operation. But Iran, Iran is about 4 times the size of Iraq, just in terms of population. Just there's just no way the United States can send its troops into Iran. So I think much more likely, because if it does get into a shooting war between the United States and Iran, that it'll be through long-range attacks. So, missile attacks, drone attacks to take out strategic targets, take out Iran's oil refineries, um, attack oil fields. That's where I would think the Americans would do it. And of course, if Iran does try to block the Straits of Hormuz, I mean, then you got American naval power will come into play. Yeah, but you're right. That's a high risk strategy because Americans will get killed in that process, and that would not be popular. And you'd have to think that Trump will become very quickly a very unpopular president. I mean, Americans don't like their country getting involved in a very dangerous war. I mean, Iran is it's a major power. I mean, it's not the equal, obviously, of the United States, but it's a major power. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think it would be very unpopular very quickly, and that would derail Trump's domestic agenda. That's why it's so troubling that Trump has put together, what is, I think, by and large, a very conventional foreign policy team. I mean, admittedly, Tulsi Gabbard, but she's involved with intelligence. She's not going to be involved in military and strategic decision making. It's a conventional interventionist foreign policy team, and therefore there's every likelihood that America will get sucked into some kind of a military confrontation, and that will sabotage his domestic agenda. Of course, he'll become very unpopular. He'll lose the midterms. Once you've lost the midterms, once you lose the House, and they got a very, very, very tiny margin in the House, you've lost the House, and that's it. Your domestic agenda's gone. You're not going to be able to pass any legislation, and they're going to impeach him. They're going to, first order of business the moment the Democrats recapture the House is to impeach Trump. So that's it. So from 2026 on, he's not going to be able to do anything. So if he's going to move on his domestic agenda, he really doesn't need to be distracted by these kind of foreign policy concerns. But if you're going to bring on these people, Sebastian Gorka, I mean, that's then I think you are going to get sucked into confrontations. And then Cynthia goes on, but big if, the US were to get involved in a shooting war with China, the battlefield will have to shift to the Pacific, leaving Israel to fight its war on its own. The US simply doesn't have enough manpower and material to fight two such wars simultaneously. At least the US only needs to send materials to Ukraine to fight a war against Russia. Ukraine just isn't the fifth column in the US that Israel is, which is why Ukraine won't ever get any manpower from the US to fight its wars like Israel. Yeah, I think in the case of China, I really don't see any real armed confrontation with China because I think Trump realizes that that's not really where China's at. That's not what China's doing. China is not trying to challenge American military might. I mean, it just isn't. I mean, it's not building any kind of a military force and any kind of a missile force that would rival U.S. military power. And it's just the U.S. is pretty much a ubiquitous presence throughout the world. Every part of the world, the U.S. maintains a military presence. There's nothing like that in the case of China. China is an economic, commercial challenge to the U.S. And that I think Trump is very ready to confront. I think through tariffs, through denying China access to America's markets, um, and again through American financial power. Um, and Trump probably thinks he can do it. I mean, China is much more vulnerable to global trade than Russia is. So I think the way they tried economic coercion against Russia, that doesn't really work because Russia isn't really that dependent on global trade. Russia in many ways, they learned in the Soviet era to maintain a fairly autarkic economic system. China is really dependent on global commerce. And so, if they got into an economic war with the United States, I think, China will be found to be very vulnerable. So I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I agree that the United States can't fight two front wars, and I agree. I mean, if there is going to be the use of U.S. force, the actual direct U.S. military power, I think it'll be in the Middle East. I think that's where it's likely to be. Something against Iran. There's no reason to get into a shooting war with Russia over Ukraine unless they really make a complete hash of things. If it's a complete disaster and they decide to escalate in Ukraine, and then Russia gets sick of it and then starts hitting countries outside of Ukraine, NATO territory outside of Ukraine, then the United States could get sucked into a shooting war with Russia. I think that's certainly a possibility. I think I don't think it's likely, because I think Biden kind of avoided that. And I think Trump probably will also avoid anything like that. But it's not impossible if the United States really decides to escalate. Particularly if removing restraints on Ukraine's use of missiles, and if these missiles start inflicting serious damage on Russia, it's going to start hitting Moscow, then Russia will be forced to extend this war beyond Ukrainian territory, and then it'll be NATO territory, and then who knows how the Americans will respond. So that's a possibility. I think it's unlikely, but I think that if there is going to be shooting, then I think it's going to take place in the Middle East. I think I agree with you, Cynthia. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you as always for your generosity. And DJ says, where were the cries of jackpot justice when they went after Alex Jones? I wonder what the award per word was. Yeah, I mean, like as I say, particularly when you get the Wall Street Journal editorial page, who for years and years, they've been going on about the litigators, these tort lawyers, these terrible people who are shaking down corporations, robbing them blind. Well, they said nothing about Alex Jones. I mean, this is the worst kind of thing. Robbing Alex Jones blind, and they heard nothing. They said nothing about that, and targeting him entirely for what he was saying, targeting him for his speech. He no one suffered any damage through anything Alex Jones said. So there was absolutely, I mean, even if you come up with something, some people suffered some kind of psychiatric disorder as a result of Alex Jones's comments on Sandy Hook. It's not going to come to $1.5 billion. So it was a complete outrage. But where are all the sort of the ones who are always going after the lawyers? Hey, stop knocking the these the auto manufacturers. Oh, that you can't. You don't go after the auto manufacturers, but yeah, but you can go after Alex Jones. Um, um, and then uh, um, so then we get to Marty. Marty, always very good to see you. Um, Marty says, apropos of my accident yesterday, says, hope you're not too badly bruised. Sending my best wishes. Thank you so much, Marty. I mean, I'm okay. I mean, I'm just a little bit, little bit shaken up, um, and and in some little bit of pain. I mean, nothing serious. I mean, it was just, uh, arms and legs got hurt, but. It's very unpleasant, and it's very unpleasant when it's somebody's stupidity that inflicts this on you. It's, some you think what kind of an idiot just switches lanes without checking in his rear view mirror. Oh, I mean, it's just really infuriating. But thank you so much, Marty. I really appreciate that. Richard Phillips says that injured. Yeah, not very serious injuries, but thank you. And then Judy says Pete Hegseth on his stand on Ukraine. I'm a neoconservative that was mugged by reality. I saw that, and I have to echo. I mean, look, I mean, there's no point in arguing about what might happen. We don't know what's going to happen in the Trump years, in the future Trump administration. But I kind of agree with what McGregor said. That was, I think um, like somebody posted. I can't remember who posted that on Locals Board, which was a conversation with Colonel Dan Davis and McGregor about Pete Hegseth. And I think McGregor was basically saying that, I think Hegseth is not somebody who thinks very deeply about any of these issues. He was a big, ardent supporter of arming Ukraine and punishing Putin initially, and then once he saw the wind was changing, and particularly once he saw that um, Trump was again gaining traction in the primaries. He kind of switched over to sounding more like Trump. The problem is with these people is I don't think they do think about these things very seriously. They do hold their fingers up in the wind, and then they say, okay, well, I'm going to say this now because it looks like that's where that is the prevailing wisdom among Republicans. Not necessarily, not prevailing wisdom in the United States, but prevailing wisdom among Republicans, and particularly among Trump and the people around Trump. I really don't think that he's thought about this very deeply. I think it's a kind of an opportunistic thing, and I think that's true about all of the people, whether it's Waltz or Rubio, who was saying one thing for months and months, and now they sound a different tune. Now, in the case of Waltz and Rubio, yes, they oppose the $100 billion package, but it was kind of quibbling, and they were trying to score political points. I mean, it wasn't in any way a principled stance. I mean, in the case of Waltz, he started making all sorts of, well, Biden hasn't spelled out his, what the agenda is. What does victory mean? Does this mean driving the Russians out of Ukraine? Does it mean, taking Crimea? Does it mean driving Putin from power? It's how you score political points against your opponents. I mean, he didn't in any way challenge the wisdom of bankrolling Ukraine to wage this war against Russia. It was just it's just quibbling about how Biden was handling it, and the Biden hasn't given a proper explanation as to what he's trying to achieve. That's a great one for it's a big cop out for politicians. You haven't spelled out what your end game is. Okay, well, that's wonderful. I wasn't particularly persuaded. Waltz has always been a hawk, as has Rubio. And let's not forget that Rubio was the one who sponsored the legislation in 2022 to prevent a future president from withdrawing from NATO without the approval of Congress. I mean, it was obviously an unconstitutional legislation. I mean, of course, any president has the power to withdraw from any treaty that he wants. He doesn't need the the advice and consent of Congress to do it. But nonetheless, it was Rubio who sponsored this legislation, and the future president was all along Trump. So, I think it goes back to with these politicians. They say many things on many occasions, and which one is the real Rubio? Which one is the real Waltz? Well, I suspect they are both swamp creatures. They're part of the foreign policy consensus. They've spent their whole lives within that swamp. They've spent their whole career peddling these familiar bromides. So I'm not terribly convinced, but I remain to be persuaded, and maybe I will be, that they really have had a change of heart. And let's go back to where were we? Anne-Marie. It was very good to see you, Anne-Marie. Thank you again for your generosity. And Anne-Marie says, I'm glad your bike accident didn't do you even more harm. Thank you so much. I'm a cyclist as well, and I know about the dangers, for example, slipping into tram tracks. Yeah, that's nasty. Yeah, that's happened to me. That can be quite scary when you slip into tram tracks, or crashing into unexpectedly opening car doors. Yeah, that's right. That happening to me more than 1 year ago, and the bruise is still visible. Really sorry to hear that. Yeah, I've had that to me also a number of times. The opening of car doors, and of course the worst of all is the taxi. People opening their taxis, and again, it's really infuriating, particularly in the case of taxis, because any taxi driver has the responsibility to alert the passenger in the back. Hey, don't open the door yet. There's somebody behind you. I mean, that, in other words, it should be part of any taxi driver's modus operandi to be checking whether there's his rear view mirror, whether there's a cyclist coming up. But instead, no, they're fine, and they just open the doors. That can be really nasty, and that has happened to me a few times, and that can be quite scary if you're knocked right into the traffic. So yeah, but I'm sorry that you were badly bruised when that happened. So yeah, it's very nasty, and it's always the driver's fault. I mean, yeah, there are stupid cyclists, but it's nearly always the drivers. When they're too busy chatting or texting or whatever talking on the phone, whatever idiotic thing, and they're not really watching what's going on. Anyway, sorry this happened to you, Anne-Marie. But anyway, thank you for your generosity. Judy says, Tulsi Gabbard went to Syria and said Assad is not our enemy. Yeah, no, she's very good. I really like her. And I think she said a lot of very sensible things. And she has been attacked, as per usual, for being Putin. She's spreading Putin's talking points. And she was being attacked today by Elizabeth Warren, who says something like, well, why don't we just cut out the middleman and let's have Putin as head of our director of our national intelligence. Really stupid, offensive nonsense from Elizabeth Warren. A really overrated person. Anyway, Cynthia says, is it really true that when you state the name of a war involving two countries, you should state the aggressor country first? Iran-Iraq war? Well, if you say the Iran-Iraq War, I mean that was started by Iraq. No, but people may not know that. But Iraq was the one that started the. But you normally say Iran-Iraq War. Um, I, I don't know. If you think about the wars, I mean, America talks about the Vietnam War as suggesting there was a kind of a war in Vietnam, even though the aggression was perpetrated by the United States. I mean, in that whatever you think of the communists, um, it was still a Vietnamese war between communists and non-communists or anti-communists. I mean, but America nonetheless got involved. It's called Vietnam, but never, hey, the U.S. Vietnam War. So um, DJ says the whole Skripal affair warrants a remake of the Marx Brothers movie Duck Soup. Hail, hail, Fredonia, land of the free. Yeah, no, that's yeah. I think we were gonna do something Duck Soup. I think I can't remember. We had one of these polls, movie polls, and Duck Soup was one of the contenders, but sadly it didn't win. But that's a wonderful movie. And then DJ says your subscribers are the ones that keep the dogs at bay, or at a minimum keep them from baying. That's very true. I mean, they're the ones who kind of give me, a little bit of a pause. Otherwise, they just simply tear my head off. Then they're just staring at me with mounting anger about my feeling frustrated at my own uselessness and incompetence. So the fact that the subscribers contribute something to the tip jar, just it keeps them for a little bit on the even keel. Otherwise, they would just simply, tear me to pieces. Anyway, Danaki says, thank you so much, DJ. I really appreciate that. Well, regarding Iran, the Section 8 headcase lunatic that he nominated for the Pentagon would be all in. And also Rubio seems to cozy up to the fanatical cult groups like MEK or whatever their name is in fomenting regime change in Iran. I think, yeah. You're absolutely right. What's interesting is that the media present Rubio as being, oh, this is the sensible choice. They're going crazy about Hegseth. They're going crazy about Tulsi. They're going crazy about Matt Gaetz. But Rubio, who's full of these kind of nutty notions, like the MEK, and of course we haven't even talked about all his regime change demands when it comes to Latin America. He's all in for trying to overthrow Maduro. So we're going to go back to that era that was under John Bolton of trying to overthrow Maduro. But Rubio is thought, oh well, that's he's sensible. He's a safe pair of hands. Very very good, solid choice. So that's the idea of that's in the that's mainstream thinking. Somebody who's a good, solid choice, who's in the business of regime change, who's in the business of waging wars. So yeah, I mean, so Judy says Gates has already resigned from his seat so that the special election can be called by DeSantis immediately. Lara Trump is ready to run for it as soon as DeSantis calls the election. And if Gates gets shut out, DeSantis could appoint Gates to replace Rubio in the Senate. Huh. Well, that's really interesting. I mean, would DeSantis do that? I mean, that would be certainly very interesting if he did that. I mean, DeSantis is the kind of thing, the person who might just do that. Even. But the one thing that makes me think that he might not is we don't know all sorts of things that might come out about Gates. I mean, we don't, I don't know if they will be, but I kind of feel that there's probably a number of skeletons in his closet. I mean, the things that we don't yet know about. He's, all sorts of sexual shenanigans that he may have been engaged in. If they just find out he's making porno movies or whatever. Um, I kind of feel that DeSantis, he's quite a straight-laced sort of guy. I think he'd find that kind of thing somewhat distasteful. Um, so that might hinder him from appointing Gates to the to Rubio's seat. However, the DeSantis has a very ornery um, aspect of his character, so he may just simply say, "Hey, well, you didn't want uh, Gates at the DOJ. Now you're going to have Gates inside the Senate chamber." So I can see him doing that. I mean, that's an interesting idea. That if the senators reject Gates or the DOJ, oh, here now you're going to have to live with Gates until was it 2028. So you're going to have you're going to have Gates to live with for another 4 years. Anyway, yeah, thank you, Judy. And then we have Danaki says, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He's a renowned colleague of esteemed Dr. Jill. Yes, he is. Yeah, I think Dr. Sebastian Gorka, he went to Hungary. I mean, he was born in the UK, but he went to Hungary to Corvinus University to get his PhD. Very, very strange thing. I mean, and something that he obviously has no knowledge of at all. Something like Islamic terrorism. I don't quite know how you do a doctorate on Islamic terrorism, but you'd have to think that somehow money changed hands for him to get that for him to get a doctorate. I mean, there's just something about him that doesn't sound like he knows has any expertise in the issue of Islamic terrorism. But he got it in at Corvinus University. That's why, I mean, you think he's born in the UK, he lives all his life in the UK. There's some very good universities in the UK, but he doesn't get his PhD anywhere there. He goes to Hungary, Corvinus University, and gets his doctorate. All right, well, you can draw your own conclusions. Linz, good to see you. Linz says, "Hi, George. We can only hope that Trump holds hundreds of cabinet meetings with all these disparate appointees, or this administration will look like herding cats." Well, maybe, but I kind of feel that the core of the foreign policy team is being forged right now, and I'm not sure that they necessarily look at the world in different ways. I mean, I think Tulsi clearly looks at the world differently, but she's going to be involved with something else. She's not going to be doing foreign policy. I think she's going to be doing intelligence and going after the intelligence agencies, as will Kash Patel if he gets the FBI nod. But in terms of the Waltz, Rubio, I mean, say a point, Gorka. I just think Gorka is such an unpleasant person. I can't see him getting on with anybody there. I think I think Gorka will be eased out quite quickly, just simply because of his unpleasant personality. But I don't know that there'd be such a huge difference of opinion among Waltz, Rubio, and in Hegseth. So that's about that name was always Hegseth. Anyway, Robert says, "I'll never forget when Trump appeared on Crossfire in the 1990s with Tom Braden, who asked Trump to name the last book he read. Trump stumbled to answer, finally saying the last book he read was his own Art of the Deal." It's funny. I also remember that was his appearance on Crossfire. Um, and yeah, he was Trump. Yeah, it was again Buchanan was the right, and then Tom Braden was the voice on the left. And Trump really didn't hit it off with Tom Braden. I mean, it got quite contentious. They really just uh, it was quite when you watched it. I mean, Braden had that kind of waspiness, that kind of arrogant waspiness, um, and you could, obviously that really annoyed Trump, and so that's why they really didn't hit it off at all. And then afterwards, when they used to do the Braden and Buchanan would sit and then discuss the conversation, for a couple of minutes. Buchanan kind of humorously turned to Braden and said, "Why were you so unpleasant to our guest today? He's such a likable, charming, nice man." And then Braden just started laughing. So it was, but I remember, but the way in which Buchanan said, "Why is he such a likable, charming, nice man?" Obviously, Buchanan didn't think that about Trump. And then Trump, of course, really tried to do in Buchanan in 2000 when they were both vying for the nomination of Ross Perot's Reform Party. Then, Trump was calling Buchanan a fascist and a Nazi and so on. So there was a lot of bad blood between Buchanan and Trump. And Trump, he's never really acknowledged his debt to Buchanan. But interesting, though, Buchanan is now quite old, whether Trump will do anything for Buchanan, give him a Presidential Medal of Freedom, or, just offer some acknowledgement to Buchanan, before he passes from the scene, that basically how much he owes to Buchanan. Anyway, Summer Petros, thank you so much for your generosity. And Danrock says, "I don't see Russia accepting, they have been quite vociferous about achieving all their goals. Not saying it can't happen, but I don't think so." I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think that, I'm saying it's a possibility that they'll accept, but because a ceasefire at this stage would be so far from their achieving their goals, the goals that Putin spelled out repeatedly. I mean, he spelled it out in February 2022, and he's repeated them. It's so far from their achieving them that it would be hard for them to accept without provoking a strong reaction within Russia. You'd have to think that Russians would be quite upset. I mean, we don't yet know the extent of the casualties, but Russians will gradually learn just how many casualties they've suffered, and then they'll say, "This is what we got. That's all." That's not going to be good for Putin. For Russians, they're very, very tolerant people, very patient people. But they can also, rebel. So if they think they've lost so many lives and have achieved so little, I think there would be a strong reaction. Cynthia says, Trump nominates RFK Jr. for his Health and Human Services Secretary. Trump says he's going to help make America healthy again. Well, I guess. That's, I think it was fairly obvious that would happen. But it's going to be, that will be an interesting, interesting whether Kennedy will be able to accept, essentially taking a very subordinate role. I mean, he's never really done that. He's always run his own organizations and so on. But he's going to just have to accept, Trump sets policy. and and so you can't just sort of start you know, openly disagreeing with Trump's pronouncements, whether it's on oil and fossil fuels and the like. So well, we'll see. We'll see. But it's good. I don't know. I think it's a good choice. Danaki says also the so-called new territory could very well be a poison pill, bleeding Russia dry with an Afghanistan or Iraq style insurgency, a guerrilla and terrorist campaign. I agree. I agree. I mean, there's no. What we know about NATO is then they're not just going to give up. They never give up. They're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. I mean, that's why didn't they accept Minsk 1 and Minsk 2? They were very good deals for Ukraine. They really were good deals for Ukraine. They were not good deals for Russia, and they just would not accept them. They just continued to push and try to antagonize Russia, make everything unacceptable to Russia. So they would absolutely, within a couple of years, as they arm Ukraine, they would launch some kind of a terrorist campaigns, insurgencies. The West is very, very good at that. The Americans are masters of launching terrorist campaigns, insurgencies, and then, with a view to provoking a response from another country, and then using that response as a justification for further escalation. That the West, the Americans have mastered this technique. They've been doing this in country after country over the years. So absolutely, I would think so. Tanaki talks about Hexes. What is his stand on Iran and the Third Temple? Yeah, he's a Third Temple man, a red heifer man. That's absolutely. So Denrock says, George, why doesn't Syria give Israel an ultimatum to leave their land, Golan Heights, then get Iran, Iraq to help them retake it? Surely no one can legally challenge this. Not saying Iran has the capability. It's hypothetical. Well, I guess they just think that none of them is really strong enough again to take on Israel. They're all afraid of Israel, and given what Israel is ready to do, just how much bombing it's ready to undertake. I mean, people can see what they did in Gaza, and people knew that this is what they would do in Gaza. Nobody really wants it, and ultimately, Israel also has nuclear weapons. So, in any attempt to challenge Israel is always going to end just very badly. So, I mean, in theory, the rest of the world pretends like, oh, the Golan Heights, that's not Israeli territory. That's part of Syria. Jerusalem, no, Jerusalem doesn't belong to Israel. No. But the reality is, no one's going to do anything about it. You can go on citing all the UN resolutions, but no one actually does anything to implement any of these UN resolutions. Just two-state solution. Two-state solution. We're going to go for a two-state solution, but no one's going to do anything about it. So yeah. I mean, Trump at least had the honesty in his first term. He just said, well, we recognize the Golan Heights as a part of Israel. Look, there was a lot of outrage. You're bucking, the international consensus. The international consensus. The Golan Heights is a part of Syria. Yeah, the international consensus, but nobody actually does anything about it. Nobody actually is going to help restore the Golan Heights to Israel. That's gone. But it's nice to have this pretension. Oh, we're sticking to UN resolutions. Anyway, thank you so much, Dan Rock. Appreciate that. Danaki says, at the moment, Trump has exactly 3 million votes ahead of Kamala, and he's looking at reaching 76 million. Still can't beat the most popular president in history. Yes, exactly. Biden Biden is the most popular president in history. There he was in his basement. Nobody saw, hide or hair of him, and 81 million Americans voted for him. um, and then And then Denrock says, dead people obviously decided not to vote this time around. Yeah, they decided, I'll skip it. I'll stay in my grave. Won't do it. And Denocchio says, quoting Richard Nixon, I didn't notice many Jewish names coming back from Vietnam. And the Chuck Colson says, well, they always manage to get themselves a desk job, deferred, or college. I saw that. I saw that tweet earlier today. I don't know when Nixon said. Nixon did say things like that, and he he. I mean, obviously, just he wasn't a great fan of the Jews, but interestingly, I mean, he wasn't even a great fan of Israel. I mean, he obviously the 1973, he felt that he had done a great deal for Israel. He saved Israel. Israel was in a lot of trouble in the early days of the Yom Kippur War, the massive airlift, and the Jews, they didn't do anything for me. They didn't do for one moment express any gratitude for the fact that I saved Israel. I think Nixon was Nixon was kind of pissed by that. But interestingly, in that I mean, I talked about this before. That interview with Ted Koppel. He went further than any American president in basically saying that American and Israeli, I mean, this is very polite. American and Israeli interests don't always coincide. Right, you can't even say that. Now, I don't think any American president has ever said that. American and Israeli interests don't always coincide. And then he explained very, very politely to Koppel that during my administration, I made clear to the Israelis that we were going to pursue good relations with Israel's neighbors. And the Israelis were very upset about that. So it was in America's interest to pursue good relations with Israel's neighbors, but Israel didn't like it. And, it was very important for him to just spell this out, that it's actually Israel that kind of pushes America to pursue bad relations with states with whom America has really no quarrel. And the same goes for Iran. America has no quarrel with Iran. There's nothing. There's no dispute. There's no land dispute. There's no ideological dispute. I mean, Iran does what it does. They have their own system. They're not trying to impose Sharia law on anyone. But somehow Iran is what Kamala Harris says, the biggest security threat facing the United States is Iran. How? In what way? What's the beef between America and Iran? There's only one beef, which is Israel. And again, if you look at all these people around Trump, they say, oh no, the source of all the problems is Iran. And yet there's really no basis for any kind of quarrel between America and Iran, but it's Israel. So it's essentially this confrontation with America and Iran is one that is engineered by Israel. And Nixon politely, very, very politely, very diplomatically pointed this out to Ted Koppel. It's on YouTube. It's well worth watching. Because Nixon just had such he spoke so clearly, and he was so precise in his use of language and how he explained the various geopolitical problems. Anyway, my time is up. So thank you everybody who has joined me. Thank you above all to everyone who has contributed to the tip jar. Tomorrow I have to talk to those ferocious hounds, and I have to explain myself. Why have I failed again? Why do I keep failing? And they're very very unsympathetic listeners, but they just think, hey, you're a stone cold loser, I'm afraid. But anyway, that's my burden. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Then over the weekend, we're going to do some more podcasts with Peter. Then on Monday, we have the live stream with Peter, and then on Tuesday, I have got the solo. And if you haven't voted yet about the what movie to screen next Monday, please do so. Classical music in cinema. Last week we had Death in Venice, and now we're trying to figure out who's the runner-up. So please vote if you haven't voted, and then we'll screen the movie on Monday night. And please, any ideas for future themes for the what theme we should have for the next screening? We'll have a poll and decide what it is. So we had classical music and movies, and we've had war and comedy. So anyone, if you can think of some good topic to feature, please do so. Post it on our locals page. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you. Good night. See you very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.